Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today is my 10,000th subscriber episode. What we are going to do to celebrate is I'm going to share with you William's Wyoming encounter. Before we get into today's episode, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fan fiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that really don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. Now, I've definitely taken enough of your time, guys. Let's get on with today's episode. Shall we? January 3rd, 1991. Location, Little America, Wyoming. I walked into the office, and it was a different feeling around the room as all the agents had attended my dad's funeral on December 23rd, 1990. Some had even served as his pallbearers, but it was time to get our sorry butts back to work now. There was nothing that we could do for him. He had told me on the day he died that he loved me. But before I could even speak back to him, he was gone. It was like he knew it was his time to go, and there was nothing left but to say goodbye. So anyway, the CO was handing out cases that needed to be worked, and he had decided to keep me in the office for a few more days, just to keep me close. And I asked if he could please send me somewhere as to get my mind off of everything that just happened. He had already assigned 2 of the 3 cases he had, and only had a Wyoming case left. Said that I would need snowshoes and snow skis for the case, and it didn't show that I had either one. I told him I'd buy what I needed to do my job, just to get me out of the office for a few days. He finally agreed. I was packed up and ready to go, receive the file. Since we had extra agents sitting around at the time, he was going to send an extra agent with each of us when we left out. I disagreed with him and told him mine was a one-man job. I needed some time to myself, and I would be fine. My case was a lady who had gone missing from a little American gas station and had been missing for 4 days now, and that 2 men had seen her being taken by a creature that was about 7 feet tall and weighed about 300 pounds with a bushy tail and a long nose. So the very next morning I fly out and stop in by the county sheriff's office and have a talk with the sheriff to see what he has to say. He then tells me that both witnesses had been drinking prior to his officers arriving and taking down the statements. That when they arrived and when they looked at her footsteps at where they ended, there were no return footsteps, and the only tracks leading away looked to be large canine. But it was almost like it was walking on the tips of its toes, is how the deputies explained it. They radioed it in and asked if he would be able to come to the scene with them, and he said he was already on his way to the location, just to keep anyone else from walking in the area. When he arrived, he was led by one of the deputies to the area, and he got a good look around. He himself followed these tracks for maybe a half a mile. There was never a sign of the woman getting put down. The snow was getting deeper, and he had no snowshoes to travel any further. So he returned to the original scene and asked if there was anything else found. He then went and questioned Cody, the man who was in charge of taking care of the gas station, and asked him what he had seen. He explained to the sheriff that himself and Alan had been out back smoking cigarettes, and there were several other people around. The sun was up and pretty bright. Customers were speaking back and forth to them and to each other when Alan drew his attention to a woman standing off in the distance. Nothing wrong with her being out there where she was. Thought she was probably walking a dog or something. Anyway, they were about to go back inside when Cody takes one more look towards the lady standing out in the field when this thing rises up, maybe 15 yards behind her and 2 foot taller than she was. We both started hollering at her, trying to get her attention when other customers see it and they also start to scream at her. And at that very last minute, she turns right into the arms of this thing. It turns and starts moving away with her at like a jogging pace. Not running, but not walking either. Alan and another customer took off after this thing. By the time they got to where it had picked her up, they could no longer see it and returned to the back side of the station. So I asked the sheriff if he had room for me to interview these two witnesses. He replied he'd be happy to help, to use his office, and it'd be no problem. He and his department would help in any way they could with this case. I asked where I could get a good pair of snowshoes. He calls in a deputy named Lisa. She asks the size shoe I wear and how much money I had to spend. I told her I wanted the best the store had and was reaching for my wallet when the sheriff said they would just bill his office if that was okay with me. I said that'd be fine. He had asked me about a warm coat and pants. I showed them what I had, and he instructed Lisa to get me what I needed to survive out in the Wyoming cold nights. That my clothing I had brought would not keep me warm. Told her to bring it to his house, that I was going to be his guest till morning. I tried to refuse, but he said everything else was full, that I needed some rest before I started out on this track. He needed to get a couple of his officers ready to go with me. I then explained that I needed to do this on my own, that I couldn't take any others with me and endanger them as I was not 100% sure what I was dealing with, which was a fabrication. But I would know for sure that following day. The next morning came early for me, as I always get up pretty early. It's 4 in the morning and I'm ready to go to the station. I've read this report so many times I can tell it to you word for word. I don't need to look at it to know what it says. Finally, Lisa drags into the sheriff's house around 5 and asks how long I've been up. That she and another officer were ready to go whenever I was. That all my new equipment was at the sheriff's office and waiting for us to arrive. We get to the office. Lisa has done very well outfitting me with my new clothes and things I needed for the field. I changed, thanked her for how well it fit, made a statement, and said her husband has it made with someone like her taking care of him all the time. That was a mistake I made. Her husband had been killed 2 years earlier in a car accident. Something ran out in front of him, and he hit a telephone pole trying to miss it. Cut the pole into half, also the car as well, and somehow threw his body around 45 feet from the car. He was dead on the scene. She passed it off. We moved on with the day. The first gentleman coming in this morning to be interviewed was Alan. He arrived right at 0800 hours, just like he was supposed to, not even a minute early. I take him into the sheriff's office to talk with him. Here is Lisa sitting in the corner with a pad and a pencil. I ask what she's doing. She says that I will need someone to take notes, like the sheriff does, right? I tell her that'll be just fine, so I introduce myself to him, ask if he remembers January 3rd, 1991, where he was that morning. He replies that he was at Little America fuel station talking with one of his friends, and that he had been there since about 3:15. I asked why he arrived so early, and he stated that his friend had some white whiskey and they were going to drink it while his friend cleaned up the place. So while Cody cleaned and drank, he sat around and watched his friend work. Alan was a fairly lazy type of person that still lived at home with his parents. He said after the station had opened that he stayed close to the back door, where he could get outside if the owners came in and checked on Cody to make sure he was doing his job well. Said that Cody finally got a break and they both stepped out back to smoke. That it was a very sunny morning. Everyone was in a good mood. There were customers all around the back side of the station as well as the front. When Cody noticed this woman who had walked out into the field behind the station, mentioned it to him. He looked up and seen her, but there was nothing wrong with her being back there, nothing to get hurt on. We finished our smokes and were getting ready to go back inside when Cody took another look at the lady in the field. Saw this thing walking up from behind her. Once again, he brings it to my attention. Also, and this thing has to be at least 2.5 feet taller than the woman. So we start yelling, trying to get her attention. She must be 150 yards away. Some customers hear us yelling, see what we're yelling about. They also start to scream at her to get her attention. Finally, she turns right into its arms of this thing. Looks like it just picks her up and turns the other way and starts to jog away with her. Myself and another customer take off in a dead run, hollering as we go. By the time we get to the place that she was standing, when this whatever grabbed her, was no sight of them. So we stopped right there. We stand, catch our breath, look at the tracks, and they appear to be large canine tracks, but it looked like it was walking on its toes. We then return to the station. The law had been called. There are several people standing in the back looking, but there's nothing to see now. I asked if the drinking could have had an effect on what they saw take her. He said no, that he could plainly see that it had a snout and a bushy tail, and the height of this thing had to be over 7 feet tall. His friend Cody was sitting in the next room, and Alan has told me about everything that he can tell me that he remembered, or that's all he says he remembers. He did add that there was just about 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground at the time, but they'd had probably that much more since it had taken place, so the tracks would be covered up, and it would take a good tracker to follow them. So I think Alan cut him loose, but I didn't want him to speak to Cody on the way out. So Lisa gets another deputy to come in, take Alan out the other way. I thank Lisa for this. I'm going to take a break before I speak to Cody. I finish going to the washroom. I come back, sit down, and Lisa brings Cody in. I introduce myself. I tell him why I'm here, and I ask him what he can tell me about what happened at the station on the morning of January 3rd, 1991, to give me as much detail as he can. My first question to him is, did your drinking play any part in what you're going to tell me? It's like he took offense to me saying something about him drinking on the job. He said I was trying to cost him his job, that me also saying Alan was in the building with him while he was cleaning was just another way of me trying to get him fired. So I stood up really fast and set him straight right there and then. That if I wanted him fired, all I'd have to do was concoct some kind of storyline, include him in it, and he would be gone. So he needed to get on the same page as me and help me, not fight against me on this, and let's just get this interview over with. So he looks like he's settled into his seat now and ready to go. I ask just to tell me what you saw, what happened on the morning. Be detailed if something really stands out to you, but start with the very first thing of the morning, okay? He says okay, takes in a deep breath and starts. He said I called Alan about 2:30 and told him I had some white whiskey if he wanted to meet me at work and hang out while I cleaned up and drink some with me. I'm not sure what time he showed up, but he did show up. All he did the whole time is sit and watch. Anyway, it's time to open. I tell him to stay close to the rear doors in case the owners come in, as they know him and I are pretty close. And if he sees them, exit through the rear doors to the outside. Finally, I've given everyone a break and I go outside to smoke. Me and Alan. While we are standing there, I spot a woman, maybe 100 yards in the back field, just standing there, and I point her out to Alan. He says she's okay, that there's nothing out there for her to get hurt on. We continue to talk and finish our smokes. It's about time to go back in, and I take one last look at the woman in the field and see what appears to be a large dog about 2 feet tall beyond her, but appears to be coming at her. Then this dog stands up on its rear feet and starts walking directly at her. I nudge Alan. I tell him to take a look. We're both in shock at what we are seeing and start screaming at the woman, as do some other customers that are seeing what's going on. After a few seconds, she looks our way. Then she turns. There, right into this thing is right in front of her. Then I think it bit her in the throat right then, but I'm not sure, but her body went limp-like. Then it kind of just picked her up and took off with her. It had a tail on it, and it was huge. One customer and Alan went running after them. Both said that when they got to the spot where they were both standing, they could no longer see them in the open field anywhere at all, and that's a wide open place. So I stop him for a minute and ask him, "Are you sure you saw it bite her?" He replies, "Yes, he did." I tell him to go on with telling what had happened. He said that when Alan went after this thing, he went inside and called the police, told them that a woman had just been abducted from the station. They kept asking Cody for a description of the man. Cody said he didn't have a description, that people were still out back that had seen it happen, that he was dragging her towards the mountains behind the station to hurry. When they showed up, they walked the deputies to the spot of the abduction, showed them the tracks. That's when the deputies called the sheriff and cleared the area. "One more thing, then we are done, Cody. You said that when you and Alan and all the deputies and sheriff walked out there, right?" He said, "Yes." I asked if there was blood on the ground, like a pool of blood, and blood leading away from there. He answered me again with a yes. I thanked him, told him he could go, and asked Lisa to close the door for a minute. And I asked how well she knows the sheriff. She's worked for him for 5.5 years. As far as she knows, he's a good man. I then asked her to look at the file before I head into the field. She studies it for a few minutes. I ask her what's wrong with this file. She has not figured it out. I ask her to bring the sheriff in. I need to question the sheriff. She brings in the sheriff. He wants to know what this is all about. He has already told me everything he knows. Has also given me the complete file. I throw the file at him and ask him to look at it again, tell me what's missing. He looks at me. Then he looks at his deputy, asks her to leave the room, now please. Lisa stands and starts to leave the room, and I tell her to sit down so that she needs to hear what the sheriff has to say. He shoots me a look that would kill. I tell him, go ahead. Tell me what's missing first, and make sure he doesn't leave anything out. Also to say it loud enough that both of us can hear it. He sighs and says, "The original pictures were taken. I ask how many were there that's missing. He comes back that he destroyed 9 photos. What did these photos show? They showed a huge pool of blood that we destroyed. Didn't want anyone else walking out to find it. If someone else walked out there, like our lady friend did, I agree the area needed to be cleaned up, but why no pictures? I needed to know what I'm working against, for one thing, and that it's already killed. Makes it even worse to deal with. I then asked if I may have one of their radios so I could get in touch with them if need be. He said he had 2 deputies ready to go with me. I told him that I hunt alone, but thank you for the kind offer. I asked how far it was to the station, and he said about 35 miles. I then asked for a ride. Lisa said she would take me, as she was one of the deputies who was supposed to go with me. The sheriff said that would be fine and apologized to me before I left. Said he never thought anything would come of the case. So now it's time for me to hunt down this Dogman and see if I can locate this woman's body. Recover it. Also, the sheriff asked me if I'm leaving if I need another night, because it's after lunch now and a bad winter storm is rolling in. I'd get caught in the open field and I won't make it to the rock fields by dark. That's a good 14-mile hike. He says he's guessing at that. He also offers one more time to have the officers go with me, but I can't put them in any danger. We loaded up my pack, and Lisa gave me 4 extra charged batteries just in case, not knowing how many days that I will be out. She starts driving us to the little American station. We talk on the way there, and if I was going to take someone with me, it would have been Lisa. But the reason why we have no female agents is on the account of that time of the month rolls around. It draws the creatures into the females. We have had 3 female agents, and lost all 3 to the one of the big 3 on the account of them having to deal with that time of the month issue. We get almost to the station. I get her to put me out before we get to the station. I test the radio, and all is well with it. I put on my pack and head off into the wilds of Wyoming. She has pointed out a point on the distant mountain and said there is another road up there, and it's probably 45 miles or so, that she will ride up there each day and down here each day to try to make contact with me, just to check in. I told her not to worry if she doesn't hear from me for up to 4 to 5 days, that I will be fine, that I may not be in radio range for the handheld. She stated that she had not been anywhere in this county that she couldn't reach the office from a handheld. I told her I would try at 1400 hours each day. It was already snowing when we parted ways, and she said when it started to get hard to walk in my boots to put on my snowshoes, it would help tremendously. I had walked what I thought was probably 8 miles, and it was so overcast and getting dark, and I knew I was never going to make it to the rock outcroppings the sheriff was talking about before it was totally dark on me, and I was going to be out in the wide open. I had already no longer see the point on the mountain that Lisa was talking about. I was warm, and I was not worried about anything except the weather. Should I stop and set up my 2-person tent and get inside till morning break and see what it brings? Should I keep on and try to get to those rock outcroppings and some shelter from the wind and snow? So, me being me, I pushed on for another 2 hours and reached the rock outcroppings just like the sheriff said they would be. I was walking down in between the rocks and finally found a very level and tight area out of the wind. It was still getting snow, but it was not getting any wind, and that was what I was looking for. So I dropped my pack and started to get everything ready. I had set my rifle down next to my pack and stepped away to let my bladder do its thing, and was moving back to where I planned to set up my tent and rest for the night. I looked at my watch, and it was 22:38 hours when I thought I saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd drawn my .45 caliber Colt Gov'T and stayed very still for a minute, listening for anything and looking for any more movement. But there was nothing but wind, and I could only see between these 4 or 5 rocks that I was setting up between. I did wait a good 15 or 20 minutes, and then I put my pistol away. I started to open my pack when it landed on my back, and I had no chance to draw my pistol or even reach for my rifle. I'd heard nothing, but I knew it had come from the top of the rocks, and had landed like it weighed hundreds of pounds. But what hurt the most was when it took its nails down both sides of my neck and upper back and just cracked me 3, maybe 4 times, I'm uncertain. I know I couldn't even fight back at all. I couldn't throw a punch, anything for offense. For the next 10 or 12 minutes, it tossed me about like I was some kind of toy ball, bouncing me off the rocks. It had torn my coat, my vest, and my shirt and undershirt all the way off of me. It had ripped my upper right leg, and then it finally got tired of tossing me around like a rag doll, and I guess it just walked away as far as I could tell. I was lying there, bleeding from my leg, from my neck and back, and I was cold. I just said my final prayer because here I was, 14 or 15 miles from anywhere, and the snow was increasing. I couldn't move. I was thinking about my wife and my boys and how I would never get to see them again, and that my wife was going to have to raise the boys alone. I've had so much blood that came out of my neck, it was in my eyes, and I couldn't see. I'm thinking this is going to be my final resting place. As I lie there with so much running through my mind that I didn't realize I'm getting colder and losing more blood, and I'm starting to go to sleep. I don't know how long I was able to remain awake, but I was fighting as hard as I could to stay awake. I was trying to move so I could find my pack and try to get something out to put on that might help keep me warm. I was even trying to see what was torn off to wrap it back around me. Anything would help, but I couldn't see anything. Then I thought to myself, in all that time that I was getting tossed from side to side, that I surely must have been thrown from between where I had originally started to where I ended. I tried with everything I had inside to move, and I collapsed to the ground one more time. I laid there for a few minutes, resting, giving my arms and legs and everything I had time to get together, and I tried to get on my hands and knees, but it was no use. I could no longer rise up, and the snow was coming down faster now. And man, was I cold, but what could I do? I was trying to find my pack and find that shortwave handheld radio and only hope that I could rise someone during the night, but I was unable to move, let alone find my pack. I was lying there struggling, trying to move, and the cold was taking its toll on me, and my mind was racing to my wife Ellen and the boys, Scott, Randy, Bobby, Joey, and William, and things I would like to say to them, or be able to write down things to them so they could read. But no, it's not going to work out this way. But at least I had fixed it so that each would be able to retire when I passed, as I had taken out extra insurance that I was paying for just to make sure in case something ever like this happened to me. I don't know what time it had turned to now, but I was covered in snow, and at that moment, that was the last thing I remembered. It was lights out, no more thoughts for me. It had been hours later, and I felt something tug on me. I don't know what it was and didn't really care, and I was back out again, and I awoke one more time for this very brief, fleeting moment, and I was being carried away by something or someone, and my eyes froze shut, and I didn't open till I could tell when. The next thing that I do remember was a voice saying, "He's going to find me something to wear," and I felt like I was in a dry, but that was it. My next memory was waking up with something on each side of me, licking at my wounds, and Lord, did it feel good to me. I stayed awake for a good 30 or so minutes, but I was so cold. I knew I was freezing to death, but they continued licking, and finally I fell back to sleep. I woke up and was just as warm as I could be, and my eyes had been cleared so I could see. I wasn't about to wake whatever it was that had warmed me. I was not going to wake it. I had one in front of me and one in the back of me. I knew it was furry, and when I looked, I knew it was 2 female werewolves. They had licked my wounds clean, and after that, they had seen how cold I was and positioned their larger bodies and took care of me by using their body heat and fur. Each one got on either side of me and wrapped their bodies around mine and kept me warm. After much time, the 3rd werewolf returned, and he was a young werewolf. Along with the 2 females, he had returned to the far north side of where I was heading, and he had returned with a coat and 2 shirts, and surprisingly, they all fit. I was able to sit up. I put them on and spoke with them, and they were fascinated that I could converse with them. They found that it to be a very joyful experience. The young male returned the next day, found my pistol, my rifle, and my pack, and brought them to me. The two females had been sleeping up against me at night because I didn't have my sleeping bag till that night. That was fixing to come, which will be the third night in a row for them to be with me, I think. After he brought my pack, I shared what food I had with them, and he said he would get us some fresh meat, but that we needed to be careful that a very large werewolf that attacked me was still within 5 to 7 miles of us, and he would be not able to fight it off if it came around. So I checked my rifle and told him that me and him would take turns watching for him, and that I could kill him. I asked how long they had been in the area, and they had been there for a couple of years. That game was very plentiful. Their only problem was this new werewolf that was in the area, and he knew he could not fight him. I asked about the 7-foot Dogman, and he said yes to that as well. Said it killed a lady a few days back, and he didn't have a clue why he did it. Was uncalled for. But that it was holed up maybe 3 miles from here in a cave, and that there was a group of 6 to 7 men that went after it the same day the Dogman took the lady, but they didn't have a tracker that could follow the tracks whatsoever. So now the weather still had not broken. He went back and he found my snowshoes, and I was looking forward to sleeping inside of my sleeping bag. And I told them that I had a 4-person tent carried just in case I ran into someone who needed it. And we could set it up if they wanted to sleep inside that. I would just use my 2-man tent, and one of the females said we could all fit in the 4-man tent. So I couldn't argue with that. She could do the math. Anyway, I set up the tent, and they told me to get comfortable on the count of my wounds, and if there was not enough room, we would set up the other tent. They were not able to help with that be due to their long claws, but I placed my sleeping bag where I wanted it and went to bed, and the others came to bed at different times. The young male came in last and sat by the open door all night long and kept a very keen watch over the rest of us. I don't know exactly when, but the one called Nicole climbed inside of my sleeping bag with me during the night sometime. Her fur was soft and warm, and she had never had the comforts like that before in her life. Should have seen her face the next morning telling Courtney about it. I asked which road was closer, and the young male said going due north was going to be a little shorter, and he had killed us a yearling buck. I dressed it, but that wore me out, and we built a small fire. I taught the young male how to build a fire, and I cooked it up a front shoulder so we would have enough for the next 2 or 3 days. I told them to eat what they wanted, that if game is that plentiful, like they said, I would take another buck down with my rifle, and not to worry about the Dogman or the werewolf, that I could kill both of them, and there was nothing they could do against me and my rifle. So the very next day, I hobbled away from camp, just about sunrise, and found a little spot, sat down, and as the sun came out, so did the deer, another spike-horn buck, 1 shot, 1 kill, just about 375 yards, and here comes my young friend, the young werewolf, and he stopped right beside me, knelt down and said, "Be quiet for a minute," and pointed to my far left, maybe 650 yards out. Here came our Dogman, nose in the air and moving pretty fast. He already had the nose for this dead deer. And I tell him that just as soon as he reaches that dead deer, I'll put a round through his head. And we both get as low as we can and still keep the Dogman in sight. I nudge the young werewolf, point to the right. Here comes the werewolf, the one that tried to make me into a short order meal for someone, but I don't know who. I am, and then figure he is coming back to make sure that I'm dead from my wounds he inflicted on me that night. And that I was turning my attention toward the werewolf, and the young one was watching. and getting a little anxious at what was going on, and I was starting to get nervous as to what was going on, fixing to happen. When all this took place, I was not reading between the lines very well. I had shifted my gun toward the werewolf. Now the werewolf had my full attention. My left hand held my Colt 45, Gov'T, but the young werewolf couldn't see it. I was thinking to myself, where was the two females at this time? About the time Nicole put her hand on my shoulder and said I needed to go with her now. I turned my head a little to look at her face, and she turned and nodded her head and saying yes quietly, as if she didn't want him to hear her saying it, and Courtney was ducked down another 10 yards behind him, also nodding. So I told him I was pulling back. He said to stay low and that he would catch up when he could. We returned and got my pack and took out everything I wouldn't need and started to swing around all of them, and that they would still cross in front of me and stay in front of me, except for the Dogman, and he would stay behind me. The trap was laid. The two females were saving my life once again. I was telling them thank you without him knowing about it, hoping that they would not turn me in to him again. It was just a game of wait and see. No one knew what the outcome was but the girls. If the guys knew, they certainly weren't letting me in one bit, which I could not show any boldness, or I would be had. If the girls showed anything, it could be bad for them also, so everyone had something to lose one way or another. So we all had our play our own hands correctly as we went through this. So as I moved, I took one last look at the Dogman, was down crawling toward the deer carcass, which meant he probably saw the werewolf and was going to try to scare him away from the deer. But that wasn't going to be easy, as I could tell that Dogman was not as big as that werewolf was. As they inched closer, I wanted to watch, but the two females were telling me no, we had to go. So on we went over the rise and out of sight. Moments later, two very distinct howls go up, and we know it's on. And you can just tell that the Dogman is already in trouble and possibly has fled the area with the werewolf not far behind. Courtney states we don't need to slow down for a while and stay to our right so the bigger werewolf will not cross our path. And then once again the snow sets in on us. The females are hoping that he doesn't go by and check the location where he jumped me, at least. Or unless he continues back toward the station, that way I had come from to see if I had went back that way. We had probably went about 1.5 miles, and both sets of female ears perked up. They looked behind us. The look on their face says there is something wrong. It's not a good feeling by appearance on their faces. They both look like they had just seen a ghost. I tell them I don't know how much longer I can keep on traveling as my right leg feels like it's going to drop off. About that same time, their ears perk up again. I ask them to tell me what's going on, what's happening to make them act this way they are acting, or what are they hearing at this point. Nicole looks at Courtney and then at me and says about the same thing, that the large werewolf has evidently killed the Dogman and he is howling in delight. I asked how they knew this and how that normally they would never fight one another. Nicole said this large werewolf is like it has rabies or something, and that it's going to take an awful lot to take him down. That is why their partner was saying that he was saying he'd rather turn to outrun him as to fight, because of the way he's acting towards everything. After he found you, more times than not, he would have left you to die and not interfered with your dying, and you were very close to it when we dug you out of the snow. He told us not to touch you. You where we would not get the scent on our fur. But we went against him on that evening when he went to find you something to put on. He was scared to go back after your pack, fearing that dog or that werewolf would be watching the area when you return. If you were no longer there, or if someone had found you and taken your body to shelter, like he did, then come back for your things. When he returned and saw us curled around you, he knew that we were all in this together now, and if he had to cross paths with this larger werewolf, he knew he couldn't win the fight due to the size and strength. So the reason he has stayed behind is to try to draw him away from his direction, and he will sound as loud as he can if and when he has to cross its path. And maybe, just maybe, we will hear it. And you must push yourself as far as you can, but when you can't go any further, to lie down and rest. One of us will take turns watching and listening the whole time you are relaxing. Understand? I replied back that I did, and they asked how much more do you think I had that I was able to go on before I was totally shut down for the day. I replied maybe a mile if I was lucky, and that would rely pushing my body to all it could be pushed. We would give it all we had. So for the next hour and a half I crawled and was led on either side by my female guides trying to get me to the road. I was thinking only about getting to that road, unable to raise anyone on the walkie-talkie now, just no one hearing me, no one at all. I finally collapsed, and they both looked at me, and I just couldn't get a read on what they were saying or I was seeing in their eyes. Was it pity? Was it disgust? What was it? I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I knew I had to rest before I could travel on. And I was wishing that the young male was there with us, but he wasn't. I rested for about 20 minutes just lying in the snow, and Nicole said we must get our tent up to protect you from the snow and get you out of the weather. I rised up and pulled out the two-man tent and stood up, not realizing what I had done, and neither one of them said anything to me about it. As done, it was finished when I climbed inside, and Courtney climbed inside and said that Nicole would be in 2 hours. But before that, Nicole had climbed inside the bag with me and actually went to sleep before I did. Her fur was like that of Nicole's, soft and warm as could be. When it was time to change out, Courtney was still sleeping hard at it, and I let Nicole get in the bag with her. And it was about 5 to 8 minutes she was asleep. Also, I was watching from the doorway of the tent. Then finally, I had the nod so bad that I woke up Courtney, and in doing so, I awoke both of them, and in my talking, both said to hush, that there was movement outside the tent. I told them to lay down and point toward the movement just as soon as each heard it. So I'm listening and watching their hands, and they point straight out of the door. It's an open flat, or maybe 100 yards. I ask how far they can hear with the wind and snow going like this. They whisper a good ways, but I can see nothing at this time when here comes the young werewolf, and he says, "We've got to get moving," that the larger one is probably tracking him by now after he was seen when he witnessed him kill the Dogman. Once again, an attack that was unprovoked, as the Dogman had turned and tried to run away from the much larger werewolf. But after a fairly long chase, the werewolf finally caught up and provoked the Dogman into a fight, and once he had him down, he started to leave and slipped, and he was seen by the larger werewolf. He looked his way, but stayed on top of the Dogman. He guessed he finished killing him as great howls of excitement went up moments later, like cheers from a champion winning streak. He was not certain that he was being followed, but he had the distinct feeling that he was, and he wanted to catch up and make sure that we were still moving, and that we didn't have time to rest. we needed to be headed toward the road and now. Said it was 4 hours till daylight and we were all in danger if he caught up to us. I said I would kill him if he caught up, and he told me I better use my energy to travel, and right now. Something in the back of my mind told me not to make a stand and go and take this fight up another day. So I said, let's move out. The young one said he was going to double back and check how much distance we were ahead of him, and I asked, by the way, what is your name? I'm sorry, I never asked. He replied, I am Justin. I told him to be safe and to catch up with us as soon as he could and to be careful. He nodded his head and he was gone into the night in one direction and myself and the two females in another. We had been traveling maybe an hour, and the females' ears went up like they were shot out of a cannon from their bodies, twisting back and forth, from which we had just come. I said loudly, what is wrong? And Nicole said, it has him. He is on the ground. I told them I had to go back for him, and they both said that it would be no use for any of us to go back now, that it would be over before any of us could get back to him. And I said, what if he only wounds him like he did me? Nicole said he would not make that mistake again. You are the reason he is now on this killing spree, because you lived. He will make sure that anything he comes up against now will die. I told them that this is the reason I must return. He will start to hunt humans, and I can't have that happen. I came here after a Dogman, but I must stop this werewolf before I leave. They explained that I needed medical help, and I was within miles of being able to get it. That it was what Justin would want, that he came out of the program and believed in what he had been taught in his release, to hunt the wild game, and when it was gone to move and find more. So that's what we had done. Courtney was born wild, and we found her wandering. She joined us and our ways of the breeding program. She still has some wild traits that come out every time to time, but mostly she is on track. I then asked them if they wanted to come back to Virginia with me, and Nicole said yes, she would, and Courtney said she was going to think about it till we got to the road, and was wondering what people are going to think when we went back into town with them. I said I would take care of that. That would be my problem. Just please, Courtney, go back with us. At that time and moment, their ears twitched again, and they both looked in the direction one more time, and after a couple of moments of silence, said, we need to go, and we need to go fast as we could. We turned and moved out. Every once in a while, one of them would look back, and you could actually see the sadness on their faces. We had traveled another hour and a half now, and you could see a hint of daylight, and I stopped and pulled out the radio to make a call. I was able to raise the office, and Lisa is in the office and hears my voice on the radio and wants to know if I was ready for pickup. I explained that I am injured and I need a patrol car as fast as possible, and I am on the north side. I will be on the road in about an hour. Lisa replies back she is on her way for pickup. I explain I need her best marksman also. I need them now to bring him and 3 more deputies with long guns. The sheriff comes on the radio and says that they will be waiting on me. I give a very rough idea where I should come out of. They were on their way. Courtney says she is going back to check on Justin to make sure of his condition. Nicole starts on her. You heard the same thing I did, and you know he's gone, but Courtney says there's a chance, isn't there, Nicole? She answers yes, but you know he is coming after us, so you need to swing wide to one side or the other to miss him, okay? They look at each other, and we all started to part ways. And she comes up to me and said, thank you for letting me sleep in that bag, most comfort I had ever known. I told her to hurry back with Justin or without, and I would get her one. We then did part our ways, moving fast as we could. just to make it to the road in the distance, and me and Nicole were making pretty good time. I could see a car going down the road now, and we both looked at each other and just kept going. And then I heard it, just like Nicole did, a horrific scream from behind, and a roar like nothing I had ever heard in my 5 years on the job. We were 300 yards from the road, and Nicole only looked at me and took off, and was gone back to see about her friend Courtney. Here was Lisa and another squad car pulling up. Lisa and another officer ran out to help me up to the road. We were like maybe 15 yards, and another horrific scream from behind us, and all I could see was nothing. And I asked, "Where's your marksman?" "He's right here," and I asked him to arm himself, and he says he is, and he stands with the three of us. We move up to the trunk of Lisa's car and peer out across the field, and I ask if he sees it, and he replies he does. And I tell him to shoot it, and shoot it in the head, and leave it where he kills it. He gets it in his crosshairs and starts to say, "What the fuck is that thing?" And I say, "Not a question, just do as you're told." He let it get within 200 yards and fired his first round from his .308 Norma Magnum. And it rolled it up like it was fallen off a tightrope. We were just watching it, and it actually tried to push itself up one more time. And just as it got to the top of its push, his rifle roared again, and the creature lurched back, and its head looked like it went into a million pieces. He started to walk out there, and Lisa said, "Let it lie. No one from the road would notice it that far out. He better not say a word about what he had just done or had taken place. When he returns to headquarters, do his paperwork and only give it to her if he wanted to remain on the force." She then looked at me, and then she took me to the county hospital and told them that I had been attacked by a bear up on the mountain, and they cleaned up my wounds and stitched my neck, back, and right leg. I remained in the hospital for the next 4 days, and after talking to my wife, she and myself decided that she wouldn't come from Georgia out there at this time because money would be tight. After 4 days were up, I had Lisa resupply me, and I had her drop me off at the north end, and I retraced my steps back through. I found each of my friends and enemies, just making sure there would be nothing I could have done. Of course, the large werewolf had its head shot off by someone other than me. Nicole, when I found her body, she was missing her head, and I never found it. Then I also found Courtney's body the same day, and she was torn into 2 separate pieces. I then camped overnight, and Lord, wasn't it pretty with all those stars out and shining in such a clear sky. I rose early the next morning, and I found Justin. He was in many pieces, like he had been tortured, his hands torn from his arms, his feet were torn from his legs. I don't know why he would try to protect anyone that much. It was something that I always meant to ask about and never did. And now them people are gone. The Dogman the vultures were feeding on, so I left it for them and called for a pickup for my friend Lisa. And we went to every motel in the county, also every bed and breakfast, but couldn't find a room. I finally asked if there was an open cell at the jail, and she asked why. I said, "I'm sure the sheriff would not mind if I borrowed one for the night." She says, "Okay," and we start to drive down there. And she drives, starts to pass it, a lonely small house out in the woods. I ask who lives there, and it's her place, and says I can spend the night there. She'll be the one to take me to the airport anyway. So I climbed into bed and went to sleep, and boy did I sleep. This is before the nightmares had taken over me. When I woke up, there she was in bed beside me. I then learned it's only a 1-bedroom house. Later that day, she takes me back to the office. I catch my flight back to Virginia and turn in my paperwork, and found out, even though the Dogman is dead and the werewolf is dead, that I got a failed on the hunt on both, as I killed neither one of the creatures myself. And that's how 2 female werewolves put their bodies together on 2 different nights to keep me warm and save my life.